Thomas Whitmore pressed his weathered hand against the doorframe, squinting through the shimmering afternoon heat at the figures cutting across his land. 6 women on horseback, their faces marked with white ceremonial clay, riding with the kind of urgency that only comes from running toward something rather than away from it. 15 years. Not a single soul had willingly crossed into this canyon. Not one. Thomas Whitmore. The lead rider pulled her horse to a halt before his porch steps. Her English was clean, precise, carrying no hesitation. "We have come to ask you to marry us." He nearly fumbled his rifle entirely. 6 Apache women sat before him, ages ranging perhaps from 19 to their mid-30s, wearing traditional dress that had seen better days. Their jewelry looked hastily collected, their horses exhausted from hard travel, but their eyes, steady, burning, refusing to look away, those told a completely different story. "You've got the wrong man." Thomas stepped backward toward his door. "I don't know any of you." The leader swung down from her horse with practiced ease. "You are the man who carved small wooden animals, the man who lost a wife named Rebecca and 3 children who never once opened their eyes." She paused deliberately. "The man who speaks to grave markers every single morning, hoping one day they might answer back." The rifle nearly slipped from his grip entirely. Nobody knew those things. He had spent 15 years making absolutely sure of it. The carved animals were ash. He'd watched every piece burn during the fever that took Rebecca. The graves bore no names, no dates, just smooth stones set into earth, and his morning conversations with the dead were barely whispers, never loud enough to carry past his own breath. "How? In God's name," he started. Then the woman reached into a leather pouch and produced something that turned his legs to water, a small wooden rabbit, thumb-sized, carved, with hands that trembled slightly when they worked, because they always trembled slightly. His hands, during those long, desperate months when Rebecca struggled through each pregnancy, he had burned every single piece. Stood and watched until there was nothing left but gray powder and smoke. Yet here it was, solid, real, impossible. "Where did you find that?" His voice barely functioned. "From a medicine woman who stayed at your wife's bedside." The Apache woman kept her voice level, watching him carefully. "Bright Feather held onto this piece for 15 years. She said she was waiting for the right moment to return it. She passed away 4 days ago, but not before telling us exactly where to find the gray-eyed rancher who carved hope into little wooden shapes. The name detonated something buried deep in Thomas's chest. Bright Feather. He'd pushed that name below everything else. The way you push things down when you cannot stand to look at them. But now it surfaced whole and vivid, the old Apache medicine woman who had appeared when no white doctor would ride this far for this little. She had brought herbs, knowledge, prayers in 2 languages, and tried with everything she had to save Rebecca and the children when everything else had already surrendered. "Bright Feather believed you would hear us," the woman continued, "because you already understand what it means to lose everything while being completely powerless to stop it." Thomas made himself look at each of them. Really look. Beneath the ceremonial clay, he found exhaustion held together by sheer determination. These were not women running a scheme. These were people who had run out of every other option first. "I am Iona." The leader introduced herself with quiet formality. "With me are Nashota, Orenda, Tallulah, Kiona, and Zora. We were each promised to men we could not accept. When we refused, our families pronounced us dead to them." She touched the white clay at her cheek. "This paint is our funeral. We cannot go back. We cannot survive alone in these territories without protection." The youngest stepped forward then, barely old enough to be called a woman. "I am Kiona. The man chosen for me had already buried 4 wives. 2 in childbirth. 2 from his hands." Her chin stayed high. "I decided I would rather face certain exile than certain death." Thomas studied them each in turn. Whatever they had fled was worse than this. Worse than riding to a stranger's door and asking him to claim them as wives. That told him everything. "Why marriage specifically?" he pressed. "Why not simply disappear until danger passes?" "Because territorial law recognizes legal marriages between Apache women and white settlers," Iona explained patiently. "Once we carry your name legally, any attempt to take us back becomes an act of aggression between peoples. Our families would be risking something much larger than 6 women." The bitter irony landed squarely on Thomas's chest. Laws written to prevent conflict over Native women would now serve as armor protecting Native women from their own families. The world was a strange, complicated place. And after, he pressed. 6 wives, 1 cabin, 1 piece of land barely producing enough for 1 man. Apache women were not raised to be decorative. Nashoda's scarred hand spoke before her words did. We build, we hunt, we preserve, we manage livestock, we grow food. We ask only for protection under your name and the right to remain on land you claim. Before Thomas could form another word, Iona's gaze shifted sharply to the mountains behind him. Dust clouds, moving fast, organized. Our family sent warriors. Her voice dropped. They will reach us before dark. If they find us without legal standing, they will take us back by force. She turned back to him. But if we belong to a white man under territorial law, dragging us away means starting something much larger than a family dispute. And if I tell you no? Iona's hand rested on the knife at her hip, not a threat toward him. A statement of intent. Then we make our final stand here on your land. We do not go back. Not alive? Thomas looked at the mountains. 10 riders, moving like a military unit. 25 minutes at best. There's no preacher out here, he said, reaching for any practical objection that might slow this runaway situation down. Territorial law provides for emergency declarations, Iona replied immediately. Witnessed by all parties involved, recorded afterward. We need your spoken agreement before those riders arrive. Nothing more. He looked at the 6 of them one final time, and something behind his ribs moved for the first time in years, the way they stood, back straight, chins level, ready to absorb whatever consequence arrived. That posture belonged to someone else he had once known. Someone who had faced every impossible diagnosis, every failed delivery, every devastating morning, standing exactly like that. The lead rider had cleared the far edge of his property now, close enough that Thomas caught fragments of shouted Apache. Words about shame, about duty, about the obligation of bringing these women home. Thomas walked forward instead of back. I, Thomas Whitmore, take you as my wives under territorial law. His voice found strength as the words moved through him. I pledge protection, provision, and my word against anyone who seeks to harm you. The women answered together, their 6 voices layering into something that sounded almost ceremonial. We accept your protection and offer ours in return. The lead warrior dismounted at the edge of the yard, rifle leveled in Thomas's direction. Not quite aimed, but clear. White man. His English came roughly but precisely. You shelter our women. Return them or face what follows. Thomas put himself squarely between the warrior and his new wives. Something in his chest had clicked back into place, something he'd assumed was permanently broken. These women are my wives under territorial law. They are under my protection. The warrior's expression tightened. He spoke rapidly to the men behind him, hands moving toward weapons, and then stopped. His eyes had found the silver pendant at Iona's throat. The fury on his face shifted. Became something else entirely. That belonged to Bright Feather. His commanding voice had gone quiet, almost careful. She gave it to us. Iona's hand moved to cover it protectively. She said it would lead us somewhere safe. The warrior studied Thomas with an entirely different kind of attention now. Bright Feather spoke of a white woman who died giving birth 4 times. Said that woman's spirit never settled. Said she had unfinished work still waiting. He paused. You are that woman's husband. Understanding fell through Thomas like cold water through dry ground. Bright Feather carried 15 winters of guilt for your wife, the warrior continued. She believed she failed her. She told us these women would find you, because you would understand their need from the inside. Behind him, an older man with ritual scars across his face spoke sharply. The young war chief responded with equal force. Thomas caught enough to understand. They were weighing a dead medicine woman's final wish against tribal law. Authority versus legacy. My uncle says Bright Feather was elderly and confused, the warrior translated flatly. He says these women belong to their families. His grip tightened on his rifle. He wants blood. Thomas stepped closer. Then he'll have to start with mine. These women asked for my word. I gave it. The uncle raised his weapon. The war chief forced the barrel toward the ground. They argued in rapid, escalating Apache. And then the young war chief did something no one anticipated. He walked to Rebecca's grave. He knelt beside the smooth, unmarked stone and placed his open hand against it. When he lifted his face, his eyes carried weight that had nothing to do with this afternoon. Bright Feather visited this grave every month for 15 years, he said, his voice carrying across the yard in perfect quiet. She brought wildflowers. She cleaned the stone. She spoke to the woman in both languages. He rose slowly. She called this white woman sacred to our people because she died reaching toward life. Thomas could not speak. All those mornings he had found fresh flowers on Rebecca's grave. He had told himself they were carried there by wind. All those times the stone seemed cleaner than he had left it. He had told himself he was misremembering. Bright Feather had been there, every month, for 15 years. She said your wife taught her something, the war chief continued, that some spirits burn too bright to be spent on a single lifetime of grief. The scarred uncle made one final argument, his voice rising. The war chief silenced him with a single gesture and turned to address the other warriors in Apache. Calm, authoritative, and final, weapons lowered one by one. The uncle wheeled his horse and rode without another word. 2 others followed. The remaining warriors stayed behind their leader. These women chose exile over chains, the war chief announced. Bright Feather said that kind of courage deserves protection, not punishment. They are no longer our responsibility to carry home. He turned back to Thomas with the first expression resembling warmth that Thomas had seen from him. I am Joseph Crowfeather. I will send word to the territorial office and make these marriages recognized under both our laws. He glanced one more time toward Rebecca's stone. Bright Feather believed your wife's spirit would rest easier once you were no longer alone. The riders departed. Thomas stood in his yard with 6 women who were legally his wives, watching dust settle across land that had known nothing but silence for 15 years, wondering how a single afternoon had dismantled everything. He thought his life had permanently become the quiet after Joseph Crowfeather's departure was different from the quiet Thomas had known before. Heavier, more alive somehow. 6 women stood in his yard with their horses and their bundled possessions, surveying a cabin built for one man living as small as possible. We cannot all winter in there. Iona stated it the way she stated everything, a simple fact requiring a practical response, not an observation requiring sympathy. Lumber in the barn, Thomas said. Tools too. The land will support more buildings easily enough. He paused, still adjusting to the reality of addressing multiple wives simultaneously. Do you have experience with construction? Tallulah, the quietest of them since they'd arrived, smiled for the first time. Apache women are taught what your white women never learn. We build, we hunt, we cure meat, we manage animals. We are not here to look pleasant near your fireplace. What followed was unlike anything Thomas had experienced in his adult life. Within hours, the property was being reorganized with the kind of efficient intelligence that suggested these women had been thinking practically through danger their entire lives. They moved through his land assessing, measuring, planning, speaking rapidly to one another in Apache, occasionally translating key points for his benefit. Orenda and Kiona crouched in his struggling vegetable garden, discussing its failures and corrections in terms that made clear they understood soil the way Thomas understood livestock. Nashoda and Zora walked his small cattle herd with practiced eyes. Your bull is finished, Nashoda informed him, her tone carrying no judgment, just information. He cannot properly manage this many cows. You need younger breeding stock before next season. Thomas laughed, an actual laugh, from somewhere in his chest that had apparently been sealed shut for 15 years. You've been here 5 hours and you're restructuring my entire operation. That is what wives do, Iona said, without looking up from the inventory she was mentally taking of his storage. We do not simply maintain, we improve. Around the fire that evening, in which the women had rebuilt more efficiently using stones. They'd gathered from the creek. They ate a meal somehow produced from supplies Thomas had considered barely adequate for himself. I need to understand how this works, Thomas said finally, looking around the circle of fire-lit faces. 6 wives. 1 husband. I don't know what is expected of any of us. The women exchanged glances. Orenda spoke. We are not six separate women competing for the same position. We are one family built from different strengths. Some of us may choose to bear children. Others will build their contributions differently. We divide responsibilities according to ability and desire, not according to rules written before we arrived here. Apache families understand that cooperation produces more than competition ever could, Tallulah added quietly. Thomas looked at each face in the firelight. Iona's leadership, steady and instinctual. Orenda's calm wisdom. Nashoda's blunt practicality. Tallulah's gentle certainty. Kiona's fierce refusal to bend. Zora's quick, watching intelligence. Together they formed something Thomas had not felt since before Rebecca died. Something that had no single word, but that he recognized from childhood, from before grief became his permanent weather. Family. What about genuine feeling? He asked carefully. Between us. I want to be honest about what I do and don't know how to offer. The fire crackled. Iona met his eyes. Love arrives in many shapes, she said. We do not expect identical feeling toward each of us, or feeling that appears before it has had time to grow. What we offer is respect, honest partnership, and the possibility of building something real together. She looked toward Rebecca's grave, barely visible in the darkness at the edge of the yard. After 15 years of speaking to stones, perhaps that is foundation enough for both sides. 6 months later, Thomas stood in the doorway of the main cabin on a morning bright enough to make the whole property look new. His property had become something else entirely. 4 additional structures had risen through the autumn: sleeping quarters, a workshop, a proper storage building for the expanded herd, a communal kitchen that had become the center of everything. The garden was twice its previous size and producing at a level that fed all of them with enough to spare for trade. Children would be born here within months. 2 of the women were visibly pregnant, having chosen motherhood on their own terms. Joseph Crowfeather arrived mid-morning with official papers from the territorial office. The governor has recognized your marriages as legal precedent, Joseph said, handing over the documents. Other Apache women facing similar circumstances now have a documented pathway. Thomas held the papers and understood what they represented. Their private solution to an impossible afternoon had become a road that others could actually walk. Your neighbors? Joseph asked, gesturing at the transformed property. Better than I expected, Thomas said honestly. The ranch produces more than ever. We trade fairly. Results persuade people that words never could. That evening, following the custom they had built together over 6 months, the family ate their evening meal at Rebecca's grave. The women had embraced this ritual without being asked, understanding intuitively that honoring the woman who came before them was the same as honoring the foundation holding everything current in place. Thomas set fresh flowers against the stone, flowers grown in the garden his wives had rebuilt from neglect. Rebecca, he kept his voice quiet and even. Brightfeather was right about them. You would have recognized something in these women immediately. The way they fight for what matters. The way they refuse to stop. Orenda, her pregnancy now obvious in the firelight, looked over at him. She would be proud of who you've become again. And it was simply true. The hollowed-out man who had lived on this land like a ghost among his own years, talking to stones, burning his own memories, shrinking his life down to the minimum required to technically continue it, that man was completely gone. In the yard where silence had reigned for 15 years, there was now argument and laughter and the sound of plans being made. In the soil where nothing had grown beyond subsistence, there was now abundance. In the cabin where one man had been slowly disappearing, there was now a family that had no template and needed none. Thomas Whitmore looked out across everything. Wives, the children coming, the neighbors they had cautiously won over, the community slowly forming around the most unlikely household in the territory, and understood something he had not understood in a very long time. Some salvations arrive looking exactly like catastrophe. Some futures knock on your door in the form of 6 desperate women who somehow know things about you that no living person should know, riding hard against a burning orange sky with warriors closing behind them. You can turn them away, or you can step forward. Thomas had stepped forward. And the life waiting on the other side of that choice was nothing he could have designed, nothing he would have thought to want, and everything, it turned out, that he had needed to find his way back to himself. The sun dropped behind the mountains, painting the canyon in shades of copper and gold. Somewhere behind him, Kiona and Zora were arguing cheerfully about tomorrow's plans. Nashota was already talking to the cattle. Tallulah had found a piece of wood and was turning it slowly in her hands, studying it the way people study something they already know how to become. Thomas Whitmore, the hermit rancher, the man who talked to stones and burned his own memories and called that surviving, smiled and turned back toward the light and the noise and the complicated, beautiful life he had somehow, impossibly been given back.